In the perfect mansion, two girls live hidden, working like shadows without a childhood. The stepmother pretends to be a mother, but turns them into servants behind locked doors. An untimely return reveals to the father what his eyes never wanted to see.
Brooke's small hands trembled as she tried to hold the bucket of water that seemed to weigh more than her own 7-year-old body. The dirty liquid sloshed onto the mansion's marble floor, leaving dark marks she knew she'd have to clean up again. Beside her, her twin sister Isabel was scrubbing the same patch of hallway for the third time, her back bent in a way no child should ever have to know. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the girls had already been awake for 2 hours. It had always been this way for as long as they could. Remember, waking up at 4 in the morning when the house was still asleep in silence, and beginning the long day of cleaning that would only end when the stars were shining in the sky again. Brooke looked at Isabel, noticing the purple circles under her brown eyes, identical to her own. They had both lost weight in the last few weeks, their cleaning uniforms, old t-shirts and faded shorts, hanging looser and looser on their frail bodies. Their stepmother, Eleanor, had cut back on their food even more, claiming they were being lazy and didn't deserve 3 meals a day. Isabel's stomach rumbled loudly in the quiet hallway, and Brooke felt her own chest tighten. They had only eaten a piece of dry bread the night before, sharing the crumb Eleanor had thrown on the kitchen floor, as if they were dogs. That's how the woman treated them, like animals that needed to be tamed through hunger and fear. Eleanor Walker had married Robert Miller 3 years ago, shortly after the twins' mother passed away. She arrived at the mansion on the Upper East Side like a savior, an elegant, well-spoken woman who promised to take care of the poor orphans. Robert, consumed by the grief of losing his wife and overwhelmed by the demands of his import company, thought he had found the perfect solution. How wrong he was. Brooke vaguely remembered what it was like before. She remembered her mother reading them stories in bed, playing in the garden, laughter echoing through the rooms. Now the 3-story, 15-room mansion was a labyrinth of silence and terror, where any door could hide a new punishment. The sound of high heels echoed down the hall, and both girls flinched instinctively. Eleanor was approaching, her elegant silhouette wrapped in a navy blue silk robe. Even at 5 in the morning, her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and her flawless makeup hid any sign of sleep. "What is this mess?" Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a blade. She pointed to the drops of water on the floor, her cold blue eyes fixed on Brooke. "Can't you even carry a bucket without making a mess?" "I'm sorry, Miss Eleanor," Brooke mumbled, lowering her head. She had learned it was better to apologize immediately, even when she hadn't done anything wrong. "Sorry doesn't clean the floor," Eleanor snapped, stepping closer to the girls. "You two are going to clean this entire hallway again. And no breakfast. Maybe hunger will teach you to work properly." Isabel swallowed a sob, her small fists clenched at her sides. Brooke saw the defiance in her sister's eyes and quickly shook her head, a silent signal they had developed over the months. It was dangerous to challenge Eleanor. The last time Isabel had protested, they were locked in the back storage room for 3 days with no food or water. Eleanor smiled, seeing the girls' contained despair. It was a smile that never appeared when Robert was home, or when they had guests. On those occasions, she transformed into the loving, dedicated stepmother, always concerned about her stepdaughter's well-being. "Oh, and girls," she added, turning before she left, "we have an important guest for dinner tonight. Mr. Fisher, your father's partner, is coming with his family. You know where you belong, don't you?" The twins nodded in silence. They knew all too well. Whenever there were guests, they were locked in the basement pantry, far from the eyes of anyone who might question why the host's daughters didn't appear to greet them. Eleanor always had an excuse ready. The girls were sick, or traveling with their grandparents, or just too shy to come out. Robert never questioned it. He trusted Eleanor blindly, convinced she had brought order and discipline to his daughters' lives. When he arrived home late from work, exhausted from meetings and business trips, Eleanor would report how well the girls had behaved, how they were developing under her care. If he noticed his daughters seemed thinner, quieter, more distant, Eleanor always had an explanation. "They're going through a phase," she'd say with false concern. "It's normal for children who've lost their mother. With time and patience, they'll get through it." And Robert believed her. He wanted to believe he had made the right decision, that his daughters were safe while he built the business empire that would secure their future. He didn't know that while he was making millions, his daughters were fighting for crumbs on their own kitchen floor. Brooke and Isabel went back to work in silence, their small, bruised hands moving heavy rags across the cold floor. The sun was beginning to rise outside, painting the sky pink and gold. But for them it might as well have been midnight. It made no difference. Every day was the same as the last. Work, hunger, fear, and the constant feeling that they had been forgotten by the world. In the kitchen, the housekeeper, Maria, watched everything through a crack in the door. Her dark eyes filled with tears as she saw the girls, but she quickly turned away. Eleanor had made it clear what would happen to any employee who interfered with the children's upbringing. Maria had 5 kids to feed and couldn't afford to lose her job. Like several others in the mansion, she had chosen the silence of survival. Meanwhile, an hour away, Robert Miller was signing contracts in his luxurious office, with no idea that the most important decisions of his life weren't on the spreadsheets in front of him, but waiting for him at home, carrying buckets that weighed more than their own lost dreams. The grandfather clock in the mansion struck 6, and the girls knew they still had 10 hours of work ahead of them. 10 hours until they could rest their heads on the thin mattresses in the back room, dreaming of a day when anyone would finally see them. Dinner at the Miller mansion was perfect. The mahogany table gleamed under the crystal chandelier, reflecting the golden light that danced on the fine china and polished silverware. Eleanor had outdone herself with the decor, with imported floral arrangements and scented candles that filled the air with French lavender. Robert smiled as he poured wine for his guests, proud of the elegance his wife had brought to their home. August Fisher, his oldest partner, praised the decor, while his wife, Carmen, admired the silk dress Eleanor was wearing. "Where are your daughters, Robert?" Carmen asked, looking around. "I've always heard you have adorable twins. We'd love to meet them." Eleanor didn't miss a beat, smiling with the ease of someone who had rehearsed the lie 100 times. "Oh, the girls came down with a bug this week. They're resting in their rooms. You know how kids get so run down when they're sick. I thought it best not to disturb them." "What a shame," Carmen murmured with genuine concern. "If you need anything, any medicine or a doctor, let me know. I have an excellent pediatrician." "That's very kind of you," Eleanor replied, exchanging a knowing look with Robert. "But they're already on." "The Mend. They'll be back to playing in the garden tomorrow." Robert nodded, confident in his wife's story. He truly believed Brooke and Isabel were sick. After all, Eleanor had mentioned they had fevers that morning before he left for work. What he didn't know was that at that very moment his daughters were locked in the damp basement pantry, sitting on the cold cement floor, listening to the laughter and conversation coming from upstairs. Brooke held Isabel, who was shivering from cold and hunger. They hadn't eaten anything since the previous morning when Eleanor had thrown a few stale crackers on the floor as punishment for working too slowly. Isabel's stomach was making loud noises, painful echoes in the small, dark pantry. "I'm so hungry," Isabel whispered, her tears soaking Brooke's shoulder. "Why does she do this to us? What did we do wrong?" Brooke felt her own heart break. How could she explain to her sister that they hadn't done anything wrong? How do you make a 7-year-old understand that some people are just cruel? She didn't fully understand it herself. She just knew she had to protect Isabel somehow. "She's mean," Brooke murmured, her own tears starting to fall. "But it'll be okay, it has to be." Upstairs, the dinner continued in a festive mood. Robert was talking about his latest import deals, excited about the record numbers he'd achieved. August congratulated him on his success, while their wives discussed the next charity gala at the country club. "Robert, you're a lucky man," August said, raising his wineglass. "A thriving business, a beautiful and dedicated wife, healthy daughters. What more could a man want?" Robert smiled, feeling truly blessed. "Eleanor has transformed our home. The girls gained a devoted mother, and I gained a partner who takes care of everything with such love." Eleanor modestly lowered her eyes, playing the part of the loving stepmother to perfection. "Robert exaggerates. I just do what any mother would. Brooke and Isabel are wonderful girls. They just need the right amount of discipline and love." In the pantry, Isabel started to cough. It was a dry, persistent cough that had started the week before and was getting worse each day. Brooke knew her sister was getting really sick, but there was no way to ask for help. Eleanor had made it clear that any drama or faking an illness would result in even worse punishments. "Try not to cough too loud," Brooke pleaded, stroking her sister's brown hair. "If she hears—" They both knew what would happen. The last time Isabel had coughed during an important visit, Eleanor locked them in the basement for 3 days, claiming they were disturbing the adults with their theatrics. When Robert asked where the girls were, she simply said they had gone to visit an imaginary aunt upstate. The family's driver, Carl, went down to the basement to get a bottle of wine from the cellar. As he passed the pantry, he heard Isabel's cough and stopped. His eyes filled with anger and sadness as he pictured the girls in there, but he knew he couldn't do anything. Eleanor had fired the last employee who questioned the children's treatment, inventing a story about theft for Robert. Carl returned to the kitchen with the bottle, where he found Maria preparing dessert. The two exchanged a look, sharing the silent weight of knowing the truth. Maria wiped her tears with her apron, while Carl clenched his fists. "We can't keep pretending we don't know," Maria whispered, checking to make sure they were alone. "And what are we going to do?" Carl replied, bitterness in his voice. "You have 5 kids, I have 3 grandkids who depend on my salary. She'll make up anything to get us fired, and who's going to believe 2 employees over her word?" Maria knew he was right. Eleanor was smart and calculating. She never hurt the girls where the marks could be seen. She never yelled when other people were around. She always had a perfect explanation for everything, and Robert trusted her completely. Back at dinner, the conversation had turned to child-rearing. Carmen was talking about the private school her children attended, praising its teaching methods and extracurricular activities. "And your girls, Robert? What school are they in?" she asked. Eleanor answered promptly. "We've opted for homeschooling temporarily. Brooke and Isabel went through a difficult time after losing their mother, so we thought it would be better for them to adjust gradually. I have a tutor who comes 3 times a week." It was a lie, of course. There was no tutor, no education. The girls could barely read beyond the basics they had learned before their mother died. Eleanor kept them ignorant on purpose, knowing that uneducated children were easier to control and manipulate. Robert nodded, impressed by his wife's dedication. "Eleanor did a lot of research on the subject. She wants to make sure the girls get individualized attention." "How admirable," August praised. "You're exemplary parents." The irony of the words cut through the air like an invisible blade. Here was a man being praised for his exemplary parenting, while his daughters wasted away in the basement of his own home, hungry and sick, invisible to the world around them. In the pantry, Isabel had stopped coughing, but now she was shivering violently. Brooke realized her sister had a fever. Her skin was hot to the touch. Panic began to set in. What if Isabel got really sick? What if she passed out? How would they explain it to Robert? "Izzy, stay with me," Brooke murmured, hugging her sister even tighter. "It'll be better tomorrow. It always is." But for the first time, Brooke wasn't sure if her words were true. Isabel was getting worse every day, and she didn't know how much longer they could hold on. The fear that something terrible would happen to her sister was mixed with the fear of what Eleanor would do if she found out Isabel was truly sick. Upstairs, the dinner was coming to an end. The guests said their goodbyes with warm praise for the couple's hospitality, promising to return the invitation soon. Robert walked them to the door, proud of the perfect evening they had hosted. Eleanor smiled and waved until August's car disappeared around the corner. Then her smile vanished like a mask being removed. She turned to Robert, who was closing the door, still smiling. "I'm going to check on the girls," he said, walking toward the stairs. "I want to see how they're feeling." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. She had to think fast. "Robert, wait," Eleanor called out quickly, her mind racing. "They must be asleep. You know how cranky kids get when you wake them up in the middle of the night. How about you check on them in the morning?" Robert paused on the bottom step, considering his wife's words. "You're right. I don't want to bother them if they're resting." He turned and smiled at Eleanor. "You always think of everything." Eleanor forced a smile, but her heart was pounding. She knew she had to get the girls out of the basement before Robert decided to check their rooms the next morning. One lie led to another, and she was running out of options. "I'll go up first to see if they're okay," she offered, trying to keep her voice casual. "If they're awake, I'll call you." Robert agreed, heading to his study to review some documents. Eleanor ran upstairs, her heart racing. She had only a few minutes to execute her plan. First, she went to the room that was supposedly the girls', a room she had turned into a storage space but kept 2 beds, made up in case Robert decided to take a look. Quickly, she messed up the beds, left half-empty glasses of water on the nightstands, and scattered some children's medicine on the dresser. She needed to create the perfect scene of sick children who had spent the day in bed. Then she crept silently down to the basement. Her hands trembled as she opened the pantry door. Brooke and Isabel were huddled in the corner, Isabel visibly worse than a few hours before. The girl was pale, her lips purplish, and her breathing was labored. "Get up," Eleanor ordered in a harsh whisper. "Now we're going to your room." Brooke tried to help Isabel up, but her sister could barely stand. Her legs were shaking violently, and she leaned against the wall to keep from falling. "She's not well," Brooke whispered, fear etched on her face. "She needs a doctor." Eleanor grabbed Brooke's arm tightly. "She needs to be quiet and obedient. If you make any noise, any drama, you'll go back to a place much worse than this basement. Understand?" Both girls nodded, terrified. Eleanor forced them slowly up the stairs, checking to see if Robert was still in his study. The sound of the classical music he often listened to while working echoed down the hall, masking the children's faltering steps. When they reached the bedroom, Eleanor shoved the girls onto the beds. Isabel collapsed onto the mattress, her eyes closed and her breathing ragged. Brooke sat on the edge of her sister's bed, holding her cold hand. "Stay here and don't make a sound," Eleanor hissed. "If your father comes up, you've been asleep for hours. If he asks you anything, you're feeling better. One wrong word, and you'll find out what it's like to go a week without food." She left the room, locking the door from the outside. Brooke looked at the lock, confirming what she already suspected. They were prisoners even when they were in their own room. Eleanor had installed external locks on every door the girls might use. Isabel was moaning softly, her small body trembling under the thin blanket. Brooke lay down beside her, trying to warm her with her own body. She knew her sister was very sick, sicker than they had ever been before. The fear that that something terrible might happen, consumed her. Downstairs, Eleanor found Robert, leaving his study. "How are they?" he asked, genuinely concerned. "Sleeping soundly," Eleanor lied. "Isabel still has a bit of a fever, but nothing to worry about. I gave her a fever reducer and she's already much better." Robert looked relieved. "Good. I want to see them tomorrow. I miss my girls when they're sick." "Of course," Eleanor agreed. "I'm sure they'll be back to playing normally tomorrow." But she knew that was far from the truth. Isabel was getting worse quickly, and Brooke was reaching her emotional limit. She needed a new plan, something to explain any visible deterioration. In the girls. In the kitchen, Maria was finishing the last of the dinner dishes. She had heard Eleanor's hurried footsteps up and down the stairs, and her motherly instinct told her something was very wrong. During dinner, she had noticed that no food had been sent up for the girls, not even a simple snack for supposedly sick children. Carl appeared in the kitchen, his expression grim. "Maria, we need to talk." They moved to the laundry room, where they could speak without being overheard. "When I went down for the wine, I heard the girl coughing," Carl sighed. "She sounded really bad. And did you notice we didn't make any food for them today?" Maria nodded, her tears threatening to spill over. "I'm worried, Carl. Those children are wasting away right in front of our eyes, and we're not doing anything." "What can we do?" Carl sat down heavily on a stool. "Who's going to believe us? Miss Eleanor is smart. If we try to talk to Mr. Miller, she'll deny everything and find a way to blame us." "But what if one of the girls dies?" Maria's voice trembled. "What if we stay quiet and something terrible happens? How will we live with ourselves?" Carl fell silent, the weight of moral responsibility crushing his shoulders. He had seen a lot in his 60 years, but he had never felt so helpless. In the bedroom, Brooke watched Isabel with growing desperation. Her sister had stopped moaning and was now breathing with difficulty, a harsh, rattling sound. Her little hands were ice cold, and she didn't respond when Brooke whispered her name. "Izzy, please," Brooke begged, gently shaking her sister's shoulder. "Don't leave me alone, please stay with me." Isabel forced her eyes open, her voice just a faint whisper. "Brooke, I can't. Panic seized Brooke. She knew she had to do something, but what? If she screamed for help, Eleanor would get there first, and they would be punished for making a scene. But if she did nothing, Isabel might. She couldn't even complete the thought. Downstairs, Robert was getting ready for bed, oblivious to the crisis unfolding upstairs. He truly believed his daughters were recovering from a simple virus, cared for by their dedicated stepmother. Eleanor, meanwhile, was in her walk-in closet, choosing her outfit for the next day. She had noticed Isabel was getting worse, but it didn't worry her. In fact, it almost reassured her. A sick child would be a perfect excuse to keep the girls isolated for longer. She could claim they needed extended bed rest, maybe even suggest a temporary stay at some private clinic far from the city. What Eleanor didn't know was that her actions were being watched more closely than she imagined. Carl had started discreetly noting the strange hours and behaviors he saw around the house. Maria was hiding leftover food in her own locker, planning a way to feed the girls without Eleanor finding out. And elsewhere, in the city, Carmen Fisher couldn't get the dinner conversation out of her head. Something about the way Eleanor had spoken of her stepdaughters bothered her. The woman had seemed strangely cold when mentioning the girls, without the natural warmth a mother would show when talking about sick children. The next morning, Robert woke up determined to see his daughters. He had missed them during dinner and wanted to make sure they were recovering well. He headed to the girls' room before even having coffee, eager to see them. When he opened the door, he found Brooke sitting on the bed, holding Isabel's hand. They were both awake, but they looked even more fragile than the last time he'd seen them. Isabel could barely lift her head, and Brooke had deep, dark circles under her eyes. "Daddy," Brooke whispered, her voice filled with an emotion Robert couldn't quite decipher. It was then that he truly looked at his daughters, really looked, and what he saw made his world begin to crumble. Robert stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes taking in every detail he had ignored for so long. The girls' clothes were far too loose, their faces had a sickly pallor, and there was something in Brooke's eyes he had never seen before, a deep, ancient sadness that shouldn't exist in the gaze of a 7-year-old child. "Brooke, Isabel," he said, approaching slowly. "How are you two feeling?" Isabel could barely open her eyes to look at her father. Her lips were dry and cracked, and when she tried to speak, only a faint whisper came out. "Daddy, I—" Robert knelt beside the bed, touching Isabel's forehead. She was burning up, yet her body was shivering with cold. How had he not realized she was this sick? Why hadn't Eleanor insisted they call a doctor? "She's burning up," Robert murmured, genuine concern in his voice. "How long has she had this fever?" Brooke glanced quickly at the door, checking if Eleanor was nearby. When she saw they were alone, her words came out in a desperate rush. "Daddy, she's been sick for days. She can barely stand up. She's eaten almost nothing, and at night she sweats a lot and says strange things." Robert frowned. "What do you mean she's eaten almost nothing? Eleanor told me you were eating normally, just with less appetite because of the virus." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Brooke looked at Isabel, then back at her father, her eyes filling with tears. Robert could see she was struggling internally, as if weighing a very difficult decision. "Daddy," she began, her voice trembling, we don't—" "Robert? What are you doing up here?" Eleanor's voice echoed from the hallway, interrupting the moment. Her quick footsteps came up the stairs, and in seconds she appeared in the doorway with a forced smile. "I came to see how the girls are," Robert explained, still kneeling beside Isabel's bed. "Isabel has a very high fever. I think we should call Dr. Harris." Eleanor entered the room with calculated movements, positioning herself between Robert and the girls. "Oh, honey, you're overreacting. It's just a little childhood bug. I already gave her a fever reducer this morning." Robert stood up but continued to look at his daughters with growing concern. "Eleanor, look at them. They seem different, thinner, paler. When was the last time they ate a full meal?" "Last night," Eleanor lied quickly. They had soup and toast. Sick kids always have less of an appetite, you know that. Brooke opened her mouth as if to protest, but Eleanor shot her a look so fierce and threatening that the girl shrank back and lowered her head. Robert noticed Brooke's reaction, and an uncomfortable feeling began to grow in his chest. "Brooke," he said softly, "do you want to tell me how you're feeling?" The girl looked nervously between her father and Eleanor. I'm fine, Daddy. Just worried about Isabel." Robert noticed the hesitation in his daughter's voice, the way she avoided his direct gaze. Something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. "I'm calling the doctor," Robert decided. "Isabel needs to be properly examined." "Robert, that's unnecessary," Eleanor protested, a hint of irritation slipping through her carefully controlled voice. "You'll scare the children. It's just a common flu." "Better safe than sorry," Robert insisted, pulling his phone from his pocket. "I'm calling Dr. Harris now." Eleanor felt panic rising in her chest. A doctor would ask questions, examine the girls more closely, and might discover signs of malnutrition or other problems she couldn't explain away. She had to act fast. "Fine," she agreed with a resigned sigh. "But let me get the girls ready first. They're a mess. And you know Dr. Harris, he always comments on everything." Robert hesitated, then nodded. "I'll call him and ask when he can come. Tell them not to worry." He left the room, already dialing the doctor's number. As soon as his footsteps faded down the hall, Eleanor turned to the girls, her contained fury making them both cringe. "If you say one word to that doctor about anything other than being sick," she hissed through clenched teeth, "you will find out what it's like to spend a month locked in the basement. A whole month without seeing sunlight, without hot food, without anything. And I will tell your father that you are liars and disturbed, that you make up stories for attention." Isabel moaned weakly, and Brooke squeezed her hand. "She needs help," Brooke whispered, mustering her courage. "She's really sick." "She's faking," Eleanor replied coldly. "You two are far too used to drama. When the doctor gets here, you will say you have the flu, that you ate well yesterday, and that I have been taking very good care of you. Anything else, and the consequences will be dire." Downstairs, Robert was on the phone with Dr. Harris, who agreed to come examine Isabel within 2 hours. After hanging up, Robert stood in the living room, a strange feeling nagging at him. Something in the way Brooke had looked at Eleanor, something in her tone of voice, didn't feel right. He went upstairs again, but this time he approached the room silently. Through the slightly ajar door, he heard Eleanor's low, menacing voice speaking to the girls. He couldn't make out the exact words, but the tone was completely different from the sweet, caring voice she used when he was around. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. He pushed the door open gently, entering unnoticed. Eleanor was bent over Isabel's bed, her finger pointed at the sick girl's face, her expression a mask of coldness he had never seen. "And if you open your mouths about anything," she was saying when she noticed Robert's presence. Instantly her expression transformed, the fake smile returning to her face like a switch being flipped. "Oh, Robert," she said, straightening up quickly. "I was just telling the girls not to be nervous about the doctor's visit." Robert watched her for a long moment, his mind processing what he had just witnessed. The contrast between the Eleanor he had seen a second ago and the one standing before him now was disturbing. "Dr. Harris will be here in 2 hours," he informed her, his voice colder than usual. "I'm going to stay with the girls until then." Eleanor blinked, surprised. "You don't have to bother, dear. I'm sure you have work to do. I'll take care of them." "I'm in no rush today," Robert replied, pulling a chair close to Isabel's bed. "It's been a while since I've spent some quality time with my daughters." The tension in the room was palpable. Eleanor knew she couldn't protest further, without raising suspicion. But Robert's presence complicated everything. She couldn't continue to intimidate the girls, and she didn't know if they would have the courage to tell the truth now that their father was there. "I'll go make some tea for Isabel," she muttered, leaving the room with stiff steps. When they were alone, Robert moved closer to his daughters. "Brooke, I want you to be completely honest with me. Is there something you're not telling me about how you feel? About how you've been treated?" Brooke looked at the closed door, then at Isabel, who was nearly unconscious with fever. Her words came out in a desperate whisper. "Daddy, we're scared." "Scared of what, honey?" Scared of her." Robert felt his world begin to crumble as he saw the tears streaming down Brooke's face, and he realized his daughter wasn't talking about being afraid of the illness or the doctor. She was talking about being afraid of her own stepmother. "Scared of her?" Robert repeated Brooke's words, a chill running down his spine. "Brooke, what exactly are you afraid of? Eleanor hasn't done anything to hurt you, has she?" Brooke glanced nervously at the door, her words coming out in whispers. "Daddy, she's not like you think. When you're not here, she—" The door swung open abruptly, and Eleanor entered carrying a tray with tea and crackers. Her smile was perfect, but Robert noticed how Brooke immediately flinched upon seeing her. "I brought some chamomile tea for Isabel," Eleanor announced, placing the tray on the nightstand. "It will help with the fever, and some crackers, in case they feel hungry." Robert watched intently as Eleanor approached Isabel with the tea. The girl opened her eyes, and upon seeing her stepmother, a look of pure terror crossed her face. It was subtle but unmistakable, the fear of a child who had learned to dread someone's presence. "Isabel doesn't have to drink it if she doesn't want to," Robert said softly, noticing how the girl trembled as she accepted the cup. "Of course she does," Eleanor replied firmly. "Sick children need to stay hydrated. Isabel, drink all of it." The commanding tone in Eleanor's voice made Robert's brow furrow. There was something too authoritarian, almost cruel, in the way she spoke to the girls. It was so different from the affectionate way she addressed them when others were around. Isabel tried to drink the tea, but her hands were shaking so much she nearly dropped the cup. Brooke quickly got up to help her, and Robert noticed how they both moved, with excessive caution, as if they were always expecting a reprimand. "Let me help," Robert offered, but Eleanor cut him off. "Don't bother, dear. They can manage on their own. Brooke, hold it steady. Isabel, stop pretending you're weaker than you really are." Eleanor's words cut through the air like a blade. Robert looked at her, stunned. "Pretending? Eleanor, she's clearly very sick." "Children exaggerate when they want attention," Eleanor replied with a forced laugh. "You know how dramatic girls can be." Robert didn't know. In fact, he was realizing he knew almost nothing about how his daughters truly were or behaved. He had trusted Eleanor so much that he had distanced himself from the girls' daily lives, believing they were in good hands. The doorbell rang through the house, announcing Dr. Harris's arrival. Robert stood up. "I'll get it." "I'll go," Eleanor said quickly. "You stay with the girls." But Robert was already leaving the room. "No, I'll go. I want to speak with him first." Eleanor stood, frozen, watching him leave with a look of growing anxiety. As soon as Robert disappeared down the hall, she turned to the girls, her eyes flashing with contained anger. "I warned you," she hissed through her teeth, "if you say anything to the doctor that isn't about being sick." "Please," Brooke pleaded, her tears now falling freely. "Isabel needs real help. She can barely stay awake." "She's faking," Eleanor insisted coldly. "You two are born liars. But if you think you're going to hurt me with this little show—" Downstairs, Robert greeted Dr. Harris at the door. Edward Harris had been the family doctor for over 10 years, a 60-year-old man with graying hair and a gentle manner. He had cared for the girls since they were babies and had known Robert since before his marriage to Eleanor. "Robert, how are they?" the doctor asked, grabbing his medical bag from his car. "I'm worried, Edward," Robert admitted as they walked up the stairs. "Isabel has had a high fever for days, from what Eleanor told me, but there's something else. They seem different. Thinner, more frightened, I don't know how to explain it." Dr. Harris paused halfway up the stairs. "Frightened? Frightened of what?" Robert hesitated. "I'm not sure. Maybe it's just the illness, but Brooke said something about being scared. And when I look at them, it's like they're constantly waiting to be scolded for something." The doctor nodded thoughtfully. In his years of experience, he had learned to recognize subtle signs that sometimes pointed to deeper family problems. "Let's go have a look at them." When they entered the room, they found Eleanor sitting in the chair beside the bed, a perfectly rehearsed expression of motherly concern on her face. The girls were silent, Brooke holding Isabel's hand. "Dr. Harris," Eleanor greeted with apparent relief. "I'm so glad you came. Isabel has a bug that just won't go away. The doctor approached the bed and smiled gently at Isabel. Hi, little one. How are you feeling? Isabel glanced quickly at Eleanor before answering in a weak voice. I have a fever, doctor. Dr. Harris noticed Isabel's glance toward Eleanor before she spoke. It was a behavior he had seen before in children who were being coerced or intimidated. He decided to conduct his examination with more care than usual. I'll need to examine her thoroughly, he said. Robert, you can stay, but perhaps it would be better if... Eleanor, could you give us a moment of privacy? Sometimes children are more comfortable talking about symptoms when there are fewer adults in the room. Eleanor opened her mouth to protest, but Robert was already nodding. That's a good idea, Eleanor. Let's let Dr. Harris work. I'd rather stay, Eleanor insisted. As their mother, I think it's important to be here. Stepmother, Robert corrected gently but firmly. And Dr. Harris has known the girls since they were babies. They'll be fine. Reluctantly, Eleanor left the room, but not before shooting one last warning look at the girls. Dr. Harris didn't miss it. So, Isabel, he began gently, checking her temperature. How long have you been feeling sick? A few days, Isabel answered weakly. And have you been eating well? Drinking plenty of fluids? Isabel looked at Brooke, then at her father, her tears starting to fall. It's normal to lose your appetite when you're sick, the doctor reassured her, but his experienced eyes were already noticing other worrying signs. The clear malnutrition, the excessive paleness, the marks of exhaustion that went beyond a simple virus. As he examined Isabel's arms to check her blood pressure, he noticed small dark marks. Not bruises from falls, but marks that looked like they had been made by someone gripping her thin arms too tightly. Brooke, he called softly, have you been feeling sick too? Brooke shook her head, but Dr. Harris noticed she also showed similar signs of malnutrition and stress. Something was very wrong here. Robert, the doctor said calmly, I need to speak with you in private. Robert nodded, realizing from the seriousness in the doctor's tone that this was no simple virus. They left the room, leaving the girls alone for a moment. In the hallway, Dr. Harris got straight to the point. Robert, how long has it been since you've really observed your daughters? I mean, spent time alone with them, without Eleanor present? I've been very busy with work, Robert admitted, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest. Eleanor always assured me they were fine. Why? What did you find? Isabel isn't just sick, Robert. She's malnourished. They both are. And there are signs that worry me, marks that suggest they may be being... The doctor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Mistreated. Robert felt the world spin around him. Mistreated? What do you mean? I need to ask the girls some questions without Eleanor present. And Robert, I need you to be prepared for the possibility that the situation in your home is very different from what you imagine. Robert felt his legs weaken. Mistreated. Edward, are you sure? Eleanor always told me they were difficult, that they needed discipline, but... Robert, look at your daughters, Dr. Harris interrupted gently. Really look. Isabel has lost at least 10 pounds since her last checkup. Brooke has signs of chronic stress, dark, circles under her eyes from not sleeping properly for months, and they both react with excessive fear to Eleanor's presence. Robert ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the doctor's words. But they never said anything to me. If they were suffering... Abused children rarely tell, Dr. Harris explained, especially when they're threatened or believe they won't be heard. I need to ask the girls some questions, but first, Robert, you need to decide if you're willing to hear the truth, even if it's painful. Robert nodded, though his mind was in turmoil. How had he let this happen? How had he not noticed his own daughters were suffering in his home? They returned to the room where the girls were still huddled together on the bed. Dr. Harris pulled a chair closer to them and smiled gently. Girls, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to be completely honest with me. You won't get in any trouble for telling the truth, I promise. Brooke looked nervously at the door. Ms. Eleanor will be mad. Eleanor isn't here, Robert said, moving closer to his daughters. It's just us. You can tell me anything. Doctor, Harris started with simple questions. Isabel, when was the last time you ate a full meal? Isabel looked at Brooke, then whispered, I don't remember. And you, Brooke? Yesterday morning we found some stale crackers in the pantry, Brooke mumbled. But before that, it's been a few days. Robert felt his stomach turn. What do you mean? Eleanor told me you had soup last night. The two girls looked at each other, and Brooke started to cry. Daddy, we haven't eaten at the table in a long time. Sometimes she throws food on the floor for us to pick. Up like we're dogs. Robert's world collapsed. What are you saying? Dr. Harris placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. Go on, girls. Where do you sleep? In the back room, Brooke answered. It's small and cold. There are just 2 mattresses on the floor. And this room? Robert asked, looking around the space he thought was his daughter's bedroom. We only come in here when you're home, Brooke explained. She lets us pretend we live here so you won't suspect anything. Robert sat down heavily in the chair, his hands shaking. How long has this been going on? Since forever, Isabel whispered in a weak voice. Since she came to live here. 3 years, Robert murmured, more to himself. You've lived like this for 3 years and I knew nothing. Dr. Harris continued his careful questioning. Girls, has Eleanor ever hurt you physically? Brooke showed her thin wrists where purple marks were visible. She squeezes really hard when she's mad, and sometimes she pulls our hair or shoves us. And does she make you work? Every day, Brooke confirmed. We clean the whole house, do the laundry, fix everything, from 4 in the morning until late at night. Robert was in complete shock. 4 in the morning, you're 7 years old. She says we need to learn to be useful, Brooke explained. That lazy children don't deserve food or love. Dr. Harris asked a few more questions, mentally documenting every detail that confirmed his worst fears. When he was finished, he turned to Robert. I need to speak with you again, in private. In the hallway, Dr. Harris was direct. Robert, this is severe abuse, malnutrition, child labor, emotional neglect, isolation. These children are being tortured in their own home. Robert leaned against the wall, feeling like he was about to faint. How did I let this happen? How was I so blind? People like Eleanor are masters of manipulation, the doctor explained. She created a perfect facade for you while keeping the girls under control through fear. What do I do now? Robert asked, desperate. First, Isabel needs to be hospitalized. She's severely dehydrated and malnourished. Second, you need to get Eleanor away from the girls immediately. And third, Dr. Harris hesitated. I have to file a report with Child Protective Services. It's mandatory in cases like this. Robert nodded, knowing it was the right thing to do, even if it meant his own negligence as a father would be exposed. Do whatever is necessary. I just want my daughters to be safe. They returned to the room to tell the girls about Isabel's hospitalization. The girl was so weak she barely protested, just held Brooke's hand tightly. I'm going with her, Robert declared. Brooke too. You're not going to be separated. It was then that they heard quick footsteps in the hall. Eleanor appeared at the door, her face a mask of fake concern. How is she, Doctor? I hope it's nothing serious. Dr. Harris faced her, squarely. Isabel needs to be hospitalized immediately. Severe malnutrition. Eleanor's face paled slightly, but she quickly recomposed her expression. Malnutrition? That's impossible. She eats normally. No, Robert said, his voice cold and firm. She doesn't. Neither of them do, and I know that now. Eleanor looked from Robert to the doctor, realizing her facade had crumbled. Robert, what's going on? Did the girls say something? You know how children can make up stories. Enough, Robert interrupted, standing up. It's over, Eleanor. I know everything. About the back room, the hunger, the forced labor, everything. Eleanor tried one last gambit. Robert, you're letting a strange doctor manipulate you against me. These girls are troubled. They always have been. I've been trying to raise them the best I can. Raise them? Robert was shaking with rage. You tortured them. They're 7 years old, and you forced them to live like slaves. I took care of them while you were at work. Eleanor screamed, her mask finally falling away completely. Those spoiled children needed to learn discipline. If they made up stories about being hungry, it's because they're manipulative, Dr. Harris intervened. Ms. Walker, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the children. Now. Eleanor realized she had lost control of the situation, her eyes filled with a cold, calculating anger. Robert, you're going to regret believing these liars. They'll destroy your life just like they destroyed my peace in this house. Get out, Robert said with a firmness that surprised even himself. Get out of this room, get out of my house, and get out of my daughters' lives. Eleanor looked at the girls one last time, and even with Robert and the doctor there, she couldn't hide the rage in her eyes. This isn't over, she muttered, before storming out of the room. Dr. Harris called for an ambulance while Robert knelt beside his daughter's bed. Forgive me, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Forgive me for not seeing, for not protecting you. Brooke took her father's hand. Daddy, you know now you can help us. But at the doorway, none of them noticed that Eleanor had stopped to listen. Her eyes gleamed with a dangerous determination. If she was going to lose everything, she would make sure Robert did too. She knew exactly how to use the legal system to her advantage, and she was already forming a plan to make Robert look like the real culprit. The war for the truth was just beginning. St. Luke's Children's Hospital was bustling on Wednesday afternoon when the ambulance arrived with Isabel. Robert held Brooke's hand as they walked through the white corridors, the smell of disinfectant mixing with the constant beeping of monitors and the low hum of healthcare professionals' voices. Isabel was immediately taken to an emergency room where a medical team began to assess her. Robert watched through the glass, seeing his daughter, so small and fragile, surrounded by doctors and nurses, hooked up to IVs and monitors that tracked every beat of her weakened heart. Mr. Miller, a nurse approached with a clipboard. I need to ask you a few questions about Isabel's medical history. Robert tried to answer, but realized with horror that he knew almost nothing about his daughter's health over the past few years. When was their last vaccination? When had they gone to the dentist? What kind of food did they like? He had no idea. I'm sorry, he mumbled, ashamed. I don't know that information. My wife took care of all that. The nurse gave him a look that was a mixture of understanding and concern. Dr. Harris had already called the hospital to explain the situation. Don't worry, sir. We'll run all the necessary tests. Brooke tugged on her father's shirt sleeve. Daddy, is Izzy going to be okay? Robert knelt to his daughter's level, seeing her eyes full of fear. She's going to be okay, sweetie. The doctors are going to take good care of her. But deep down, Robert wasn't sure of anything. Dr. Harris had been clear about the severity of Isabel's condition: severe malnutrition, dehydration, possible anemia. How had a 7-year-old gotten to this point without him noticing? A hospital social worker, Frances Olson, approached them. She was a woman in her 40s with brown hair tied in a bun and kind eyes, but Robert immediately sensed they were also very observant. Mr. Miller, I'm Frances Olson, a social worker here at the hospital. We need to talk about the girl's situation. Robert nodded, knowing this moment would come. Of course. Brooke, how about you go to the playroom while we talk? Brooke shook her head vehemently. I don't want to leave you, Daddy. I'm afraid that when I come back, you'll be gone. Brooke's words cut Robert's heart like a knife. She was afraid he would abandon her, just as had happened so many times when Eleanor isolated her from him. I'm not going anywhere, Robert promised, sitting in a chair and pulling Brooke onto his lap. You can talk in front of her, Miss Olson. Brooke needs to hear that I'm on her side. Frances nodded and sat across from them. Dr. Harris gave me some information about the situation at home. I need to better understand how this happened and for so long without your knowledge. Robert took a deep breath. I worked a lot. I left early, came home late. Eleanor always told me the girls were fine, that they were difficult, but that she was handling them. I trusted her completely. When was the last time you spent a full day with your daughters? Robert thought, trying to remember. The answer shamed him deeply. I can't remember. Maybe a year ago, or more. And school? Did you follow their academic progress? Eleanor said they were being homeschooled. With a private tutor, I never questioned it. Francis made some notes. Mr. Miller, I'll be direct, child. Protective Services will be opening a case. What happened to your daughters is severe neglect, and even if you didn't know the details, as their father, you are responsible for their well-being. Robert nodded, tears beginning to stream down his face. I know. I failed them. But now I want to do everything right. I want to take care of them. Protect them. That will be evaluated, Francis said gently. For now, Brooke can stay with you, but under supervision, and we will need assurances that Eleanor will have no further access to the girls. Just then Robert's phone rang. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. He answered hesitantly. Robert, we need to talk, came Eleanor's voice, but there was something different in her tone, a calculated coldness he had never heard before. We have nothing to talk about, Eleanor. It's over. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say, she replied. I'm with my lawyer right now. He's very interested to know how a father could be so negligent as to let his daughters get into this state. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. What are you talking about? I'm talking about a man who abandoned his young daughters to work obsessively, who never took an interest in their daily lives, who didn't even know they were sick. A man who is the one truly responsible for everything that happened. Robert realized what she was doing. Eleanor was trying to flip the narrative to place all the blame on him. You know that's a lie, Robert said, trying to keep his voice down so as not to scare Brooke. Do I? I have 3 years of evidence of your neglect, Robert. Witnesses to how you were never present, how you didn't care about the girls. And now when your dedicated wife tried to care for them alone, and you finally paid attention, you decide to make her the villain to hide your own failings. Robert hung up the phone, his hands shaking. Francis had watched the entire exchange and noticed his distress. Trouble? She asked. Eleanor is with a lawyer. She's going to try to pin all the blame on me. Francis sighed. Unfortunately, that's common in cases like this. But we have clear medical evidence of the abuse. The girl's own words, that counts for a lot. That afternoon, while Isabel received intensive medical care, Robert didn't leave Brooke's side for a minute. They ate together in the hospital cafeteria. Brooke devoured the food as if she'd never seen such abundance, which broke Robert's heart even more. Daddy, Brooke said as she drank her 3rd glass of juice, do you promise you'll never let Miss Eleanor come back? I promise, Robert said, taking his daughter's small hands. She will never get near you again. But even as he made that promise, Robert knew the fight was far from over. Eleanor was smart and manipulative. She had spent 3 years building an image of a dedicated stepmother, while he had proven himself to be an absent father. In a courtroom, who would look more guilty? That night, Robert slept in the chair beside Isabel's bed, holding Brooke's hand, who had insisted on staying at the hospital too. It was the first night in 3 years that the girls slept truly protected, but Robert knew it was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. The next morning, when Robert woke with a sore neck from the rough night, he found Francis waiting for him with a grim expression. Mr. Miller, we have a problem, she said, in a low voice. Eleanor has filed a petition in court claiming you are psychologically unstable and a danger to the girls. She's requesting temporary custody, arguing that she's the only caregiver they know and that separating them from her would be another trauma. Robert felt the world spin. She can do that? She did. We have a preliminary hearing this afternoon. You're going to need a lawyer, and you're going to need one now. Robert looked at Brooke, sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, and at Isabel, who was finally showing signs of improvement. How could Eleanor try to take them back after everything she had done? But Robert was determined to fight. No matter what it cost, he would not let his daughters return to that hell. The legal war ahead would be brutal, but he was ready to face anything to protect Brooke and Isabel. Robert's phone rang again. This time it was his corporate lawyer, who had received a notification about the case. Robert, we need to meet immediately, the lawyer's urgent voice said. The situation is more complicated than we thought. The law offices of Martin and Associates were tensely silent when Robert arrived for the emergency meeting. His lawyer, Michael Martin, a man in his 50s with 25 years of experience in family law, was surrounded by documents spread across his desk. "Robert, sit down," Michael said with a grave expression. "We need to talk about Eleanor's petition, but first, we discovered something that changes this case completely." Robert sat, still shaken by the possibility of losing his daughters again. "What did you find?" Michael pulled out a thick folder. "Remember your first wife Claire's will? When she passed, she left a trust fund for the girls, correct?" "Yes, they can only access the money when they turn 18, Robert confirmed. "It's a considerable amount, about $2 million. "Exactly. And do you remember the specific clauses of that trust?" Robert frowned. "Not completely. There were so many documents at the time." Michael opened the will. "Here's the crucial point. If anything happens to you, or if you are declared unfit to care for the girls, control of the trust passes to the children's legal guardian until they turn 18. During that period, the guardian has access to the trust's income for expenses related to care and education." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. "How much money does that represent annually?" "Approximately $200,000 a year in income," Michael answered. "And here's what we found. Eleanor has been consulting with lawyers specializing in guardianship and trust funds for over a year. She was preparing for this." "Are you saying she planned all of this?" "I'm saying she had a very strong financial motive to isolate your daughters from you and create conditions that would demonstrate your negligence as a father," Michael explained. "If she could convince a court that you are unfit and that she is the only suitable guardian, she would gain legal access to $200,000 a year for the next 11 years. Robert shot up from his chair, pacing the room. "Over $2 million. She tortured my daughters for money." "There's more," Michael continued. "I hired a private investigator to look into Eleanor's past. We found out she's done this before." Robert spun around. "What do you mean?" "Eleanor has been married twice before. In both cases, there were children and inheritance issues involved. In her first marriage, she managed to become the legal guardian of her husband's son after allegations of paternal neglect. The second situation was similar. In both cases, when the children came of age and she lost access to the funds, the relationships ended abruptly." Robert felt a cold rage wash over him. "She's a financial predator." "And now we can prove it," Michael said, pulling out another document. "On top of that, I got something better. Maria Rodriguez, the housekeeper who works in your home, has finally agreed to testify. She kept evidence." "Maria? But she was always so quiet." "She was afraid of losing her job. But when she heard the girls were in the hospital, she decided to speak up. And Robert, what she has could completely destroy Eleanor's defense." Michael showed him a shoebox filled with photographs, videos on a cell phone, and handwritten notes. "Maria secretly documented the abuse for 2 years, Michael explained. Photos of the girls cleaning the house, sleeping in the back room, eating off the floor. Videos of Eleanor screaming at them and forcing them to work. And a diary detailing every incident she witnessed. Robert picked up one of the photos with trembling hands. It was Brooke and Isabel, visibly younger, scrubbing the marble floor of the living room with buckets bigger than they were. The image was devastating. "Why didn't she show me this before?" Robert asked, his voice breaking. "She tried to reach you a few times, but Eleanor always intercepted her. Maria also recorded conversations where Eleanor threatens to fire any employee who interfered with the children's upbringing." Michael played one of the audio clips. Eleanor's cold voice echoed through the room. "If anyone here meddles in the children's affairs, they'll lose their job on the spot. And I'll make sure they never find work in New York again. These girls need to learn discipline, and anyone who doesn't like it can leave now." "There's more," Michael continued. "Carl, your driver, has also decided to talk. He has a log of every time Eleanor instructed him to lie to you about the girls' whereabouts. According to him, whenever you asked for them, she made up excuses. They were at a friend's house, too sick to come out to sleep. He wrote it all down in a notebook." Robert sat down again, processing all the information. "Do we have enough evidence?" "Robert, we have more than enough evidence to not only ensure you keep custody of the girls, but also to press criminal charges against Eleanor for child abuse, child labor, and financial fraud." The hearing took place the following afternoon at the family court building. Robert arrived with Michael, carrying several briefcases of documents. Across the room, Eleanor was elegantly dressed, accompanied by her lawyer, Dr. Richard Vance, known for his skill in manipulating legal narratives. Judge Carmen Alvarez, a woman with graying hair and a sharp gaze, examined the preliminary documents before starting the hearing. "We are here to review the emergency custody petition filed by Ms. Eleanor Walker against Mr. Robert Miller," the judge announced. "Dr. Vance, present your argument." Eleanor's lawyer stood with confidence. "Your Honor, my client spent 3 years single-handedly caring for Mr. Miller's daughters, who has proven to be a completely absent father. The children are traumatized by the sudden change in routine and need the stability that only my client can provide." "Objection, Your Honor," Michael interrupted. "The defense is presenting a completely false narrative of the facts. We request permission to present our evidence." The judge nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Martin." Michael stood, holding the first piece of evidence. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of an absent father, but a case of systematic manipulation and child abuse with a financial motive." He presented Maria's photographs, the videos, the audio recordings. The judge's expression grew more serious with each piece of evidence. When the audio of Eleanor threatening the staff was played, the woman's face visibly paled. "Furthermore," Michael continued, "we have discovered that the petitioner has a history of similar behavior. She has been involved with 2 other widowed men with children and trust funds, using the same strategy of isolating the children to gain control over their inheritances." Dr. Vance tried to object. "Your Honor, this is speculation." "It is not speculation," Michael cut in, presenting the investigator's documents. "We have public records of guardianship in the other 2 cases, followed by the termination of the relationships as soon as access to the funds ceased." The judge studied the documents for several minutes in silence. "Ms. Walker, would you like to respond to these allegations?" Eleanor stood, trying to maintain her composure, but her mask of the dedicated stepmother was clearly cracking. "Your Honor, these accusations are absurd. I love those children as if they were my own." "Then why?" the judge asked firmly. "Is there a record of you consulting with lawyers about guardianship and trust funds 14 months prior to this petition?" Eleanor fell silent, her face drained of all color. "And why," the judge continued, "do we have photographic and video evidence of 7-year-old children performing heavy domestic labor under your supervision?" Michael presented the final piece of evidence. "Your Honor, we request that the victims themselves be heard. Isabel Miller is recovering in the hospital, but Brooke Miller is present and would like to speak with you in private." The judge agreed to hear Brooke in her chambers, with only a specialized psychologist present. After 30 minutes, they returned. The judge's face was clearly disturbed. "Considering all the evidence presented and the testimony of the minor," the judge announced, "this court categorically denies the custody petition of Ms. Eleanor Walker. Furthermore, I am ordering that she be immediately barred from any contact with the minors, Brooke and Isabel Miller." Eleanor shot up from her seat. "This is a mistake. Those children will suffer without me." "Ms. Walker," the judge said coldly, "I recommend you find a criminal defense attorney. The district attorney's office will be notified of this case for possible prosecution for child abuse and fraud." Robert felt an immense wave of relief as the decision was announced. Finally, his daughters were truly safe. 6 months later, Robert was sitting in the backyard of his home, a new, smaller, cozier house, watching Brooke and Isabel play on the swing set. The girls had recovered physically, gaining weight and color. More importantly, they were smiling again. Isabel ran up to him, her brown hair shining in the sun. "Daddy, come play with us." Robert smiled, closing the laptop where he now only worked part-time. "Of course, sweetie." Brooke came over and took his hand. "Daddy, thank you for saving us." Robert knelt and hugged both his daughters. "Thank you for teaching me what really matters." Eleanor had been convicted of child abuse and attempted fraud, serving a 3-year sentence in a minimum security facility. Most importantly, she could never come near Brooke and Isabel again. As he watched his daughters play freely, without fear, without hunger, without the shadow of abuse hanging over them, Robert knew He had found something more valuable than all the professional success in the world. A real family, built on love, protection, and presence. The sun set over New York City, painting the sky gold, and for the first time in years that house was truly filled with peace, laughter, and hope.